The magic of The Wizard of Oz was something nobody was supposed to see behind. Buddy Ebsen spent weeks unable to breathe after the Tin Man makeup nearly killed him. Margaret Hamilton's face caught fire during a stunt and she carried the scars for the rest of her life. Judy Garland was just 16 when the studio started giving her pills to keep working and sleeping pills to shut her down when they were done. But the real story is what happened to the footage they shot, footage that audiences are only now starting to piece together. There was a darker version of this film. It ran 20 minutes longer. And when MGM saw it, they made a decision. What exactly were they trying to hide, and why are people still searching for the answer 86 years later? In 1937, Walt Disney released Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, and the whole film world stopped cold. The movie earned roughly $8.5 million against a budget of only $1.5 million. Suddenly, fairy tales could make serious money. The bright colors, the songs, and the magical world pulled families into theaters in numbers nobody had predicted. Studios that once laughed at feature-length animation were now terrified, and none more so than MGM. Louis B. Mayer ordered his team to find a rival property immediately. They landed on L. Frank Baum's The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, beloved since 1900, with a built-in audience and enough spectacle to match Disney's ambitions using live actors, music, and visual tricks nobody had seen before. The rights alone cost $75,000, a staggering price in an era when the country was still climbing out of economic hardship. Several studios were competing for them. MGM won, but the victory came with chaos. The budget kept climbing. Schedules collapsed. The dream nearly fell apart before a single frame was shot. The story had almost gone in a completely different direction. Back in 1934, producer Samuel Goldwyn had purchased the Oz rights for $40,000 from Baum's estate. He imagined it as a showcase for his comedy star Eddie Cantor as the Scarecrow, waking up in Oz and cracking jokes through a string of musical numbers. W.C. Fields was discussed as the Wizard. Shirley Temple was floated for Dorothy. For years, nothing moved. Then Snow White changed everything. Every major studio came calling. MGM stepped in during February 1938 with their $75,000 offer, nearly double what Goldwyn had paid, and walked away with the prize. Cantor lost his dream role. Ray Bolger eventually took over as the Scarecrow and transformed the character into something warmer and stranger and more human than comedy could have reached. Once MGM closed the deal, the money started disappearing fast. The average MGM film at the time cost around $500,000. Oz blew past that almost immediately. The final tally reached somewhere between $2.77 million and $3.7 million depending on which records you trust. Special effects, Technicolor processing, elaborate makeup, a 5-month shooting schedule, everything cost more than anyone had planned. Arnold Gillespie built visual illusions using wire rigs and double exposures. The Emerald City existed largely as painted backgrounds. Makeup artist Jack Dawn created the Tin Man and Cowardly Lion designs, but both came with their own dangers. The lion costume, made from real animal fur, caused severe allergic reactions. And the Tin Man's silver look would soon nearly kill the man wearing it. 12 different writers worked on the script at various points, and the chaos showed. Herman Mankiewicz drafted early scenes heavy with Kansas detail and sharp humor before leaving over a payment dispute. Noel Langley arrived from South Africa with a complete treatment, only to find Florence Ryerson and Edgar Allan Wolfe already rewriting portions of it behind his back. Victor Fleming demanded the Kansas sequences be stripped down and quieted. Entire reels of test footage, including scenes shot under director Richard Thorpe, featuring Dorothy with blonde hair and an early version of the Wicked Witch with her hair down, were reviewed and destroyed. The studio did not want the public seeing the early mistakes. Thorpe later claimed in interviews that none of his footage survived, it was all thrown out. History what those scenes look like can only be guessed at from the handful of production stills that made it to the present day. Casting Dorothy created its own war. Shirley Temple sat at the top of MGM's wish list in 1938, but 20th Century Fox refused to release her. A complicated trade was floated, Clark Gable and Jean Harlow in exchange, but Harlow died suddenly in 1937 and the deal collapsed before it could begin. Deanna Durbin came close, too. At 16, she was already famous for her voice and traveled to MGM for screen tests, even singing Over the Rainbow beautifully. But Mayer decided she looked too mature. He wanted Dorothy to seem younger and more innocent. Durbin went back to Universal and eventually left Hollywood entirely, settling in France, the missed opportunity never quite leaving her. Judy Garland herself nearly lost the role for the opposite reason. She was 16 and the studio considered her too old for Dorothy in the story. They forced her into costumes designed to hide her figure, pushed her to act more childlike during rehearsals, and kept a tight grip on her image throughout production. Garland didn't always take kindly to it. But her voice and her emotion gave Dorothy a soul nobody else could have supplied. The film's world premiere happened far from Hollywood in Oconomowoc, Wisconsin, on August 12, 1939, a quiet test run for a movie MGM feared might fail. The town had a quiet connection. Composer Herbert Stothard spent summers nearby, and Meinhard Robb, the little actor who played the Munchkin coroner, had grown up just 30 miles away in Watertown. On screen, Robb spoke for less than 15 seconds. Around town, he was already a local celebrity. For 5 straight days, every seat was filled. The loudest reaction came when Garland began to sing Over the Rainbow. MGM sent those reports back to California immediately, and within days the film had grand premieres in Hollywood and New York before its wide release on August 25. But the numbers told a harder story. The film earned roughly $3 million worldwide and ranked as the third biggest release of 1939, yet MGM claimed it had actually lost $1 million. The costs had simply spiraled too far. Some people later believed the studio accounting worked to shift profits around to avoid tax obligations and bonus payments. Whatever the truth, the film only turned a genuine profit years later through theatrical re-releases and then through television. It wasn't until 1949, during its first reissue, that the film neared its break-even point, and only after its television debut in 1956 did it finally become truly profitable. Partridge, a classic film. And now, more than 8 decades later, as the 85th anniversary brought renewed attention to the film, including a 4K Ultra HD release from Warner Bros. Featuring Dolby Vision HDR and a Dolby Atmos soundtrack, Media Play News, audiences have started looking harder at what was cut. The deleted jitterbug sequence is perhaps the most haunting loss. MGM spent 5 weeks rehearsing it. The Wicked Witch was supposed to send a monstrous insect into the haunted forest, and once it bit Dorothy and her companions, their bodies would lose all control, snapping into a frenzied 6-minute dance neither they nor the audience could stop. Bobby Connolly drilled the cast relentlessly for weeks. The actual filming took only 4 brutal days, from January 9 to January 13, 1939, and the scene still cost $80,000. It was cut anyway. Producers worried the jitterbug craze would date the film and that the silliness would undercut the dark tension building in the forest. Parts of the audio survived on various releases, but the footage is gone. What remains is a feeling like a party you were invited to but never reached, and a few haunting crumbs that hint at what once existed. Masterworks, The Barber. Then there was the triumphal parade. After Dorothy melts the Wicked Witch, the original version did not simply move on. 300 green-clad Emerald City extras were costumed and filmed marching through the city streets in a full production number, a strutting band, marching soldiers, singing townspeople, girls with garlands of flowers, and the chant of ding-dong. The Witch is Dead swelled into a grand reprise. OZ Museum. For people who saw it in early previews, it was meant to feel like the biggest payoff the film had to offer. But the movie was running long, and the studio started trimming wherever it could. The parade was cut. What survives is almost nothing: a brief flicker in an early trailer, a handful of black and white production stills, and the knowledge that it once existed. Then there was the Tin Man's beehive scene, a moment that would have made him seem genuinely terrifying and indestructible, bees swarming him, stingers bending uselessly against his metal body. Rare productions still show the moment frozen, bees on the Tin Man's arm, Dorothy reacting beside him. The footage itself is gone. Modern audiences, raised on behind-the-scenes extras and social media oversharing, react differently to these discoveries. They don't just watch the restored snippets, they interrogate them. Online forums dissect Judy Garland's body language and outtakes and compare different cuts of the same scene to track how studio executives softened the film's darker tones. What once looked like disposable scraps now feels like evidence of old Hollywood power dynamics. Masterworks the barber. Buddy Ebsen's story had already pointed the way. He had worked 10 full days as the Tin Man, rehearsing scenes and building chemistry with Garland, before one evening after dinner he suddenly could not breathe. His chest locked. His wife called an ambulance. At Good Samaritan Hospital in Los Angeles, doctors discovered that aluminum dust from his makeup had settled deep in his lungs. The powder had been sprayed over a white base every single day, and Ebsen had been breathing it in without any protection. He lay in critical condition for weeks. The studio at first told him to come back to work. Only when executives visited and saw him lying inside an iron lung did they accept how serious the situation was. When Jack Haley replaced him, the formula was changed to an aluminum paste that stayed on the skin rather than floating through the air. The danger remained part of the production. It was simply better hidden. Margaret Hamilton faced her own disaster. During a scene where the Wicked Witch disappears in a burst of fire and smoke, the flames erupted before she had fully descended below the stage. Fire rushed across her face and hand. The green makeup containing copper compounds had to be scrubbed away with harsh chemicals from her open wounds. Hamilton later said the cleaning hurt worse than the fire. She spent 6 weeks recovering and refused to perform any more fire scenes for the remainder of the production. A stunt double was later injured in an explosion effect during the same run of filming. And Judy Garland. She was 16 when filming began. The studio gave her stimulants to get through the punishing hours and sleeping pills to shut her down between sessions. The cycle locked in quickly. By the time the film wrapped, she depended on both. What had started as a production convenience became a lifelong burden. The deleted moments don't just reveal production tricks, they reveal human bodies being pushed past comfort for the sake of something timeless, and they connect directly to modern conversations about overworked performers and the price studios extract from people in the name of a hit. Masterworks the barber. At the 1940 Academy Awards, Over the Rainbow won Best Original Song, and Herbert Stothart received the award for Best Original Score. Garland was given a special juvenile Oscar, a miniature statuette that looked almost like a toy in her hands. She thanked the crowd. She was 17. At 17, she had created one of the most recognizable characters in cinema history, and the Academy still classified her as a child performer rather than a serious actress. She rarely watched the film again afterward. The memories behind it were too painful. In 2024, the Library of Congress determined that The Wizard of Oz has been seen by more viewers than any other movie ever made. Parkridge, a classic film every few years, something new surfaces from the lost footage, a mislabeled can from an old vault, a playback disc in a private collection, a family estate with a box nobody has opened in decades, and the story shifts again. The yellow brick road, it turns out, has never really ended. It just keeps leading back to the same question: what else did they choose to destroy, and why?